Hi, my name is Connor Brown, and I will be presenting on stopping stock trading within Congress today. First, we'll look at the sources that we used for this. First, we used House Bill 3003, which is titled Bipartisan Restoring Faith in Congress Act, and that bill was drafted by Matt Gaetz and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This bill is currently in the drafting phase and will soon be voted on by the House of Representatives. The second source we used was a showcase panel with the title of The Original View of Congress. And here are all the contributors to that. Pay attention to Tara Helfman because we will cite her later on. Moving on, we're going to be looking at who are the sources intended for. I think overall, both of these sources, the general audience, is the American population. And although that might seem a little bit like a cop-out, when we look, this is a federal piece of legislation that's being passed. I think it's a good thing for all American citizens to be aware of what legislation is being worked on and what could potentially be affecting them, which this would. And with the showcase panel, this is a history all about the legislative branch of our government, which is something that all of us should know. We should know kind of where our legislators come from, what the goal of them are, and what the original view of them were. Now looking a little bit more focused, going back to House Bill, I think we can accurately assume that the primary audience for this is actual Congress members. Future Congress members as well, but primarily right now, current members and aspiring members of Congress, their spouses and their dependents, as that bill would directly affect them the most. Also, with the showcase panel, I think that we can accurately assume that the more focused audience would be anybody partaking in our government. Rather if that's in activism, rather if that's holding office, rather if that's in lobbying, anybody that's much more focused on our government should know these things about the history of the legislator. Next, we'll look at the thesis of both of these sources. Obviously, this is a showcase panel, so a lot of different contributors and all of them are making different points, so there might not have been one pure thesis, but one purpose of the panel as a whole was to look at the difference between current Congress and our past Congress and what the intention for Congress was to be. Also, the main purpose and quite likely the thesis overall would be to show the difference between what our Congress was intended to be versus what it is now. And then with the bill, obviously this is a piece of legislation, so there's not as much of a thesis as much as there is a purpose behind it. And we can look at this and say the purpose of this is to eradicate stock trading within our legislative branch. Also, when you look at the purpose of this, I'll read this. The purpose of this bill is to eliminate Congress's ability to trade stocks with the purpose of ushering in a Congress that is more focused on serving the citizens of our country. And I think that would also accurately describe a thesis for this. Wanting to, admit that the people have lost a little bit of faith in Congress. So this is a way that we can usher in a little bit more of a trusting environment between us and our government. Looking at the research of which has taken place, we have the showcase panel, which looks at a lot of different first-hand accounts and primary sources from the history of America and our legislator, going all the way back to the Articles of Confederation to modern day, looking at those primary resources where they got a lot of their points and really a lot of their talking points. So that's really where all the research happened there. Now looking at House Bill 3003, a lot of their research, obviously this was drafted and written within the chambers of Congress. Obviously AOC and Bill Gates were the two main writers, but I'm sure there were other contributors throughout Congress to that. But a lot of their research probably came from polling, where they are thinking about this bill, they send out the polls, and if people respond well, they're going to push it through, which they have, and that's why the bill's being pushed through right now. Now, context. We'll start with the showcase panel, what's probably the more difficult context to find just because it focuses so much on the stuff that we already know and the stuff that we already have lived through. Looking at the historic Congress and the original view of Congress, the best context for this would be to look at where we are now and look at the demographics of Congress, whether that's racial, financial, gender. Look at those. Look at the powers that Congress have, and then compare them to the original view. And that's going to be the best context. It's going to be figuring out where we are now and comparing it to what the source says about the original view of Congress. Now, House Bill 3003, context is a little bit different. This is very, very current context, and I'll read this. House Bill 3003 has been drafted because people have lost faith that Congress is using its power responsibly and not for personal gain. along with instances of members of Congress making particular trades surrounding information that the public wasn't aware of. When you look at the context of this bill going through, you're going to find a lot of instances of members of Congress going and making trades that look particular, that look suspect, of going, how did you know to offload all of these stocks right before the recession happened following the pandemic? And that's going to be the context that really ushered in this bill and this way of thinking. Now moving on, we look at counter arguments and why would people argue against this? Now with the context, with the older original intention of Congress, obviously that stuff is going to be subjective. When you look back at these primary resources, we can both look at the same piece of paper and come out with two completely different ideas. And that's going to be the counter argument for this, is that it's subjective. Not only that, but our government is supposed to evolve. That is what the original purpose of our government as a whole was to do, to be able to evolve with the times. The difference is we need to try to pick out what is good evolution and what needs to stay true to what our founders wanted. But those will be the counter arguments for that. Now looking at the White House bill, the House bill, the counter arguments are going to be mostly that this is too restrictive and that there are ways to solve this problem without going and putting this much restriction on Congress, because it will face backlash through people that say we're not going to get the same level of congressmen that we want if they can't have the opportunity to make the money that they could before. So that's going to be the main counter arguments against that. Now looking at ethos, pathos, and logos, what kind of arguments were they making? This is pretty cut and dry. This is going to be an all objective, all analytical based source. When you look at House Bill 3003, since this is a piece of legislation, they're not going to be sitting there playing on your emotions. They're not going to be sitting there playing on your ego. This is going to be an objective resource. And that's what we found. It's mostly going to appeal to the logic side of it. Now looking at the showcase panel, they're going to look at both logos and pathos, because although they do use primary resources, they do use a lot of the analytical stuff that we see in a logos argument. Looking at pathos, most of their arguments center around the fact of, yes, Congress has evolved, but you guys are the one as citizens getting the short end of the stick. Congress is evolving in a way that makes them more powerful and the citizens less powerful. So that's going to be where they really appeal to your emotions and really run away with the pathos argument. Now, looking at public support, this is a graph that's going to show people who both support and oppose a ban on stock trading within Congress. Now, we're going to focus on this top bar right here because these bottom three bars split it into different parties, so Democrat, Independents, and Republicans. This top bar is going to be all of them together. And what you'll see is that these blue ones right here, the 46 and the 17%, either strongly or somewhat support the banning of stock trading within Congress. Now, the gray is undecided, they don't have an opinion on it, but this little red over here, the 11% and the 8%, either strongly oppose or somewhat oppose the idea of banning stock trading. So as you can see, this has way more than a majority support for banning stock trading within Congress. And now we look at the importance of the issue, and I'll start off with this quote right here because I think that this really is what started this for a lot of people, and this thinking is really what started it for me personally, is that the founders intended for Congress to be a civil duty that would call congressmen away from their daily pursuits to serve the public. Now, when you look at your current Congress, do you feel like that's accurate? For a lot of people, the answer was no, and for me, the answer was no. And that's what really started this, and that's the core of this issue, is why are congressmen able to use their power and use their access to information to be able to put themselves at an advantage over the everyday citizen in the financial markets? Now, we can look at this as well. Congress, along with all aspects of our government, should be an institution that has one goal, the betterment of the American people. Inherently, there is a conflict of interest when it comes to stock trading and having classified information. Now, all these are accurate when you look at where we're at today with our government and the fact of, do you feel like the betterment of the American people is the number one goal right now, or do you feel like it's personal gain? Do you feel like there is an inherent conflict of interest when it comes to having access to classified information and also being able to partake in the same markets that all U.S. citizens do? For me, the answers are no. And that's where we kind of leave off with our last call to action, which is our government will always be an environment for personal gain if we don't begin to clean it up. And it can start with this bill. And this bill is exactly what we're all looking for and exactly what we wrote about, and that is stock trading should be eliminated from Congress. And that's it. Thank you for your guys' time. Any questions I'd be happy to take. Here are all the sources that we use. We have the Restoring Faith in Government Act, then we have the panel, and then we have that graph, the source for that graph. But thank you guys for your time.